Welcome to It's Upgrade Season, the only place to get raw and unfiltered advice on how to get your shit together 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Alexandria, and join me every Monday for The Upgrade and every Friday for The Wind Down, where I'm going to be answering your dilemmas. Small shifts, huge upgrades. Let's fucking do this. Hey babes, and welcome back to It's Upgrade Season podcast, where we provide you with raw and unfiltered advice on getting your shit together so you can live a life even greater than your vision board. And today we have the most incredible guest. I am so excited to welcome to the podcast Sarah Jenks. Now, Sarah is a real life ordained priestess who has devoted her life to creating spaces for women to have their own remembering and normalizing the presence of the sacred feminine in our culture. If you don't know about this yet, we're going to go into this in the podcast. And honestly, this is something that has blown my mind in recent years. Just the way that women have been written out in a historical sense and what impact that's had on us over the years. So we're going to cover all of this. But Sarah's magic doesn't start there. She is an absolute genius in creating sacred containers that allow you to talk directly to your soul, your fully expressed self, and the truest version of you. Through her guidance, she empowers individuals to manifest the lives they were meant to live. And I am a living, breathing testament to this because I actually did this ceremony with Sarah the day after I recorded this podcast. I spoke about it on last Friday's Wind Down. So if you haven't caught that, definitely listen in. And it was honestly the most powerful ceremony I've ever done. And I've done plant medicine. I've done crazy shit. This was mind blowing. It felt like you were on mushrooms. I was seeing visuals. I had massive downloads. I had huge releases. It was honestly so incredible. I'm her number one fan now. I want to do all the things. Sarah's also just a fucking vibe because even though she's a priestess, she has this energy of just being a fucking girl you want to have a chat with. She is an avid skinny dipper. She's a frequent globetrotter. She is a lover of fancy restaurants and she talks to trees. Plus, she's a mum of 3 and she's a wife of a surgeon and a co-owner of a spiritual retreat center. And again, we dive into this on the podcast today, all about having a surgeon as a husband and how to get your partners to do the spiritual work and what that journey looked like going on it together and the real about motherhood, which she has just she just changed things for me last week. I'm so grateful to her. She is the epitome of breaking the rules and embracing the extraordinary. So get ready, babes, because today's episode is one not to miss. Get ready to be inspired, to challenge the status quo, and to embark on a journey of transformation with our amazing guest, Sarah Jenks. Let's go in. Welcome to It's Upgrade Season.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have a feeling already this is going to be such a fun conversation.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's just fucking go there. Okay, so you are a priestess. And when you first shared that, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is incredible. And then I did have a moment where I was like, hang on, what is a priestess exactly?
Yeah.
I was like, it sounds fucking cool. And I'm like, hang on, no, tell me more about this. So what the fuck is a priestess?
Yeah. So just like a Catholic church has a priest,
Yeah.
or a Jewish community has a rabbi, I am the leader of a sacred feminine spiritual community. And what's so important for everyone to know is that priestesses used to be as normal as ministers or priests. They were actually more prevalent for tens of thousands of years. And it's only been recently, because of the deliberate erasure of the sacred feminine, that people don't know what priestesses are, don't know what our role is in society, and also think it's really weird. I mean, I know you don't think that way, but
I don't think
I come across a fair amount of people that are like, ooh.
This is wild.
Yeah.
So you said they were erased. Maybe this is my inner history geek coming out here.
Yeah.
But why, when, why, how? Tell me about this.
Well, that is a very long story.
Okay.
That I have this is something that we do inside of my spiritual community, Holy Woman. Okay. So I teach a whole 3-hour layout, what happened, from the beginning of human existence 2.5 million years ago. And then when we started to see the first archaeological existences of, the first art were statues of goddesses. So we know that goddess worship was the center of human society for a very long time. And there were many attempts to erase the sacred feminine, but I think the part that is most important for people to know is that around the year 400 is when they started compiling Constantine's version of the Bible. Okay. And what's important to understand about that is that he didn't necessarily do this to celebrate the work of Jesus. He really did this to create a tool of control. And then he went on to use that tool to control people through the wide spread of his armies. So what happened was they were actually trying to take land and therefore money and people so that they could create an empire. Yeah. And what they said they were doing was spreading Christianity and using violence to do that. And if you look at the rise of this oppressive patriarchal controlling system, the number one tool that they used first, as soon as they came into a village or came into a community, was they burned the sacred feminine temples. They destroyed them. They killed or tortured or raped the women, and especially the women who were the center of the spiritual community, because that's how you break a spirit of a village. And what's so important about the sacred feminine is, we've evolved with metaphor. So our human brains really emerge and are developed by learning through story. And they've shown this, through neuroimaging, that when you read a story, when you read a metaphor, your brain lights up in different places. So if you think about it, if you are being raised on these stories and metaphors of powerful, independent women who are fierce and loving, and there's all of these archetypes about all the different ways you can be a woman, and all the different ways you can show up, and all the different ways you can be a mother, and you can be a mother and a lover at the same time, and the leader of a community. And when we're raised on those metaphors, we see ourselves in that power. And so it was really smart of these guys who wanted to take over the world to remove those stories, to remove that metaphors, because then over time, women are raised without this knowledge of who we are and what we're capable of. So I think it's really important for all of us to understand. And when I was doing my research on the sacred feminine, because I was coming alive in it and I wanted to understand what was going on, I just sort of thought it fell out of fashion. I was just like, well, the sacred feminine is maybe just weird and people weren't so into that anymore. But then what I realized, it was deliberately and violently erased. I started to dig into why. And what was so interesting is that as I was learning about it, I was coming alive more. And I started to stand up for myself more, and I started to think differently, because I had a really hard time when I became a mom. I really sunk into all of those internalized patriarchal patterns. And I just think it is so interesting when I realized that the primary tool of the oppressive patriarchy was to erase the sacred feminine. So what would happen if we put it back? And that's really the work that I do.
Okay, there's so much I want to dive into already. I want to dive into your experience of motherhood.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to that loop. But I feel like you started to touch on it already. But the thing that just keeps coming through my mind as you're sharing this is like, what was so fucking scary about the sacred feminine? Like, why did women need to be so oppressed? Like, what were men so afraid of?
Well, that's a really great question. So I think a lot of it came in layers. The top layer was, during the time when the sacred feminine was in charge, when there was a matriarchy, women are really attuned to the needs of others. And so what often happened was the wealth was spread out, people were tended to, land was shared.
Sounds terrible.
Right? Terrible. So you can imagine if there are power hungry people, if it's they had a model of power over people.
Yeah.
The people who were in charge of distributing power were the biggest threat to that. So when there's a hoarding of goods, when there's a hoarding of money, when there's a hoarding of land, the first point of place that they would go to is taking out the people who are against that. And then I think the other part that is important to understand is that women, when we are connected with our sacred selves, we are really not controllable. And we're going to do whatever the fuck we want.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is really scary for people who want to have oppressive power. And the other thing, and this goes into the motherhood conversation, when you look at specifically the burning times in Europe, they deliberately went after single women and sex workers and women who made their own money, which was usually in the sacred feminine arts. So they made their own money being midwives, being herbalists, being the village healer.
Yeah.
And that was also a threat because what they wanted to do was they wanted it to make women unable to own property or have money, so that the only job they could have was to produce more children. So, we're in this time period, we're really the first generation that's choosing whether or not to have kids and feeling more comfortable with that choice, where in generations, for the past few generations, it has been really shameful to not have children, to not be a mother. A woman's worth has been really based on being a mother. And I definitely felt that. And if you look back to the burning times when you would have been more targeted for being a witch if you weren't married and have children, then you could see how there would be all this fear around doing it differently.
Yeah.
And what I love about learning about the sacred feminine is that when I tell women that story, especially women who have felt bad about not wanting to have children, which I think is a super important choice, and they hear that story and then they realize that, oh, before the burning times, there were so many women who didn't have children or they had children without being married. And it just gives us permission to do what feels real for us in our soul, as opposed to doing what we always feel like we should do.
Oh my God. It's just so many downloads and things in that. Like, I feel like, first of all, such a reminder that things aren't linear.
Yeah.
Because actually we just went back. We went so backwards. Like, women were single, not having babies, healers, independent. And then we just threw them back into the dark ages. And then, we're reemerging in that time now.
And it's also important to understand that things weren't perfect or idyllic back then in other ways. But when we're talking about women's freedom, women's right to own property, it is true that there was a very long period of time when we had many more rights than we did, at the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And I also think it's so important to understand that not only was this process of the erasure of the sacred feminine about taking our political rights away, but it was also about brainwashing us. Because part of the things that I've been studying recently, and I've been asking myself, why is it that I know so many women who do have freedom, who do have choice, who do have political rights, and they're not using them? They still feel so much pressure to be someone who they're not. And for years, I've just been asking myself, why? And then when I became a mom, this is what happened to me. All of a sudden, I have a baby, and I'm also the primary breadwinner because my husband was in his surgical residency at the time. And I'm feeling this pressure to have the house clean and dinner on the table before my husband comes home from work. And I'm just what is happening to me? I am a very well-educated, successful feminist.
Yeah.
And it's this weird 1950s alien took over my body.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what is happening to my psychology? And that was really when I started to dig into how does internalized patriarchy work and how have we all been brainwashed? And it really goes back to the erasure of the sacred feminine. It's wild.
So I want to put these two parts together in my head because I fucking get this.
Yeah.
Like there was definitely a part of me that was like, for me, it was like feeling guilty that I didn't want to be a full-time mom.
Yep.
Because I was like,
Been there.
oh, I'm a mom. I should want to be a full-time mom. And I'd be like, I'd be so miserable as a full-time mom personally.
Same.
Because everyone's different.
Yep.
Oh my God, it's so nice to have someone else say same.
Yeah.
Like I had all this thing around like I should want to be a full-time stay-at-home mom and I should want to, maybe I should just push Jake in his career and I should be the support right now and I should be in the supporting role and really trying to like put myself in this box almost that I just don't fit in and having to go through a bit of that journey. But then the piece I'm trying to put together in my head is like, and I do think, and I want to talk to you about this because I feel like on the positive side, we speak so much more about feminine energy these days and, you know, the re-rising of the feminine in so many ways. And I think we also get so many conflicting messages about what that looks but also feels like.
Yeah.
So you're saying two things to me here. So one is that being this kind of 1950s housewife and putting food on the table isn't actually, well, I'm going to ad lib and then you can correct me.
Yeah. Okay.
Isn't inherently what the feminine is about.
Right.
The feminine is about freedom.
Yeah.
But then there's also this side of feminine that's being taught, which is like we should be submissive to our husbands. We should lean out. We should, I don't know, do all these things. Which is it? I don't get it.
That's a really great question. Okay, so this is just my opinion.
Okay.
So I believe that the feminine is about range. And really what we're talking about when I talk about the sacred feminine is we're talking about, you know, when I think about masculine and feminine, I think about masculine as a bowl and feminine as the water. But the water can be a river, a lake, an ocean, underground streams, springs, a glass of water. Just like we can be literally anything. And if you look at it archetypally, we've only been raised by two primary archetypes of the feminine, which is the virgin mother and the whore. And so this is why I believe we feel all this pressure to be these like pious dinner on the table moms. And what I want to encourage women to think about is their own wellspring of truth. So it's more about deepening into the truth of the soul that we came in as and our unique expression in all of our roles. And also understanding how our roles are not competing of each other. So in my lineage, which is the 13 moon lineage, we study 13 different archetypes of the feminine. And what I love is that I have had the practice of how can I embody as many of these archetypes at the same time and not feel like I have to choose. And we can also see this in the zodiac. So when we go through the zodiac are really like 12 different archetypes. And we need all 12 in order to feel whole. And another part of the feminine, I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it, but you can also look at it in the elements, you know, air, fire, earth, water.
Yeah.
And I feel like each of those elements really represent a different part of us, like air being our ambition and fire being our passion and water being our connection to nourishing people, whether that's our friends or our children or our family, and earth being our connection to the land and our bodies. We get to be all of those things. And the masculine is very linear, and we have not been educated in the elements in the tarot, in the zodiac, because embedded in that is a map for how women can be fully expressed. And I think it's so, like, if anybody has an inclination of wanting to be different, you need to follow it, because the more examples we have of women who are doing things differently, the more permission it's going to give everybody to be just the truth of who we are, because we're really all as unique as our own fingerprint. And when we're trained to believe we all have to be one way, it really squelches creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening in motherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I really felt the same way. And I had this whole identity crisis because like I just thought I was going to have a baby and then just want to spend all day with them.
Okay. I've got so much curiosity about this.
Yeah.
I need to hear about this.
Yeah.
So I actually, because I obviously did a little stalky stalk. I know a little bit about, you were talking about your son, being
Marshall.
being a lot of energy.
Yeah.
But just like talk me through. So I actually want to start in pregnancy because I feel like pregnancy isn't necessarily spoken about enough. And I really think that's the start of the motherhood journey.
Yeah.
How was your first pregnancy?
Yeah, my first pregnancy was really beautiful. It was around the time that I was pregnant with Marshall around 11 years ago. Yeah. So it was around the time that I was sitting in ceremony for the first time. And so I was having this spiritual awakening while I was pregnant.
Wow.
And I had this moment at like 32 weeks where I decided that I didn't want to be in the hospital. I wanted to have a home birth. And my husband is a surgeon. So that was my first moment of, am I going to stand that I know better about my body than my physician husband? It was
How
a
did this
big
conversation go
moment. It was tough. Like in the beginning, he was really not into it, but I had to really hold my ground because I knew that this was something that I needed to follow, whether or not we were going to end up at home, which we actually did, and we ended up in the hospital. I mean, we planned on having a home birth. I was a transfer, but my midwife was with us. My doula was with us. But I had to really stand in, I believe in this and I need you to believe in me, and let's follow this path together until we both feel comfortable. So, and I really had to say, Jonathan, maybe you don't know. Because doctors are trained to believe that they know everything.
Yeah.
And me on the path of healing my own internalized patriarchy, being with a person who is so entrenched in a career that's entrenched in patriarchy was a really beautiful assignment for me. So we went through the whole process, and when he spoke to our midwife, he just really saw that she knew so much more than my obstetrician about babies and about birth. So he really respected her. And what was so amazing is that we then started doing all the hypnobirthing and preparing for a home birth and doing all the things. And he said to himself, wow, if something that I thought was so medical can actually be so spiritual, how could I see my own field differently? And Jonathan is a urologist, and he's now created an entire practice around how men's emotional health impacts their bodies and their sexual health. And it's been so beautiful. So now he leads men's circles and he gets men to talk about their feelings so that they can have stronger erections. It's like,
I love that.
It's
Also,
really great.
You guys are a fucking vibe together.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I just need to caveat this with just saying, because we met at my friend's Mel's wedding, and like you two together, you're just a fucking vibe.
Oh, thanks. We just really love each other so much. We have such a great time.
Yeah.
So it was just a great example of, I was so scared to sort of stand up to him in an area that he was supposed to be an expert in. But also I am an expert in my body, and women get to be an expert in birth. And it changed the course of his life. So that was my pregnancy. My pregnancy was really beautiful. I was convinced that my baby was going to be this like Zen, quiet Buddha, because you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I can feel him. He's like this wise owl. And then he comes out and he looks like a boxer. He's so swollen. And he's just the most intense kid like you've ever met. He still is. And he has been one of my biggest initiators. And the beginning of motherhood was super hard for me because I really wanted to love it and I didn't. It was really hard. I mean, it was also hard because Jonathan was working 90 hours a week and making less money than our nanny. Wow. And I was, I was learning about who I was. And because the thing about sitting in ceremony is that you start to know who you are, and it's not always great. I was starting to hear that I was supposed to lead ceremony and do spiritual work, but, I come from a traditional suburb outside of Boston, and went to like a preppy liberal arts college. I was not supposed to be a priestess.
It was like giving priestess vibes.
No, it was like already so weird that I was an emotional eating coach, and I was not available to be weirder. But
was not available.
I was not available to be weirder, and I was worried about my whole business collapsing, and not being able to make money, and just all the things. So it was hard. Plus the whole identity crisis, and just thinking I was going to be different.
So talk me through the identity crisis, and I love like specificity as well. So like the timeline. So you're already sitting in ceremony. You are pregnant sitting in ceremony.
Yeah.
You're already hearing this whisper of like you're meant to go into this path.
Yeah. First, I just kept getting the whispers. You aren't who you think you are.
Oh, ominous.
Like, you aren't who you think you are. You aren't who you think you are. And I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, really? I thought it was pretty clear.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. So you're hearing the whisper. What was like the next stage?
So the next stage was something that started to happen to me in ceremony. And I lead women through this now in my ceremonies. Was I started to see things. So I would close my eyes and we would go into what I now call soul journeys. And I would have these really vivid visions of leading large groups of women outside in these ceremonial experiences. And I'm like, I literally quit my advertising job 2 years ago. Like, what is even happening here? But it felt so real. And it's such a powerful tool, because as the sacred feminine is coming back, and as women are expanding back into the roles that are really meant for us, we aren't going to see examples outside of us. We're only going to see examples inside of us. And I believe that when we get quiet enough and we get in the right environments, we have access to a true vision of what we're meant to do. So I'm getting these visions in ceremony. I'm totally freaking out. I have major postpartum depression because I'm just alone. My family isn't nearby. Jonathan's at work all day, and I'm not enjoying myself.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to love it.
Yeah.
So I'm now really beating myself up. And I'm this like, well-known life coach at the time, and pretending that I was fine.
Yeah.
And layering on, and it was really that piece around pretending I was fine and being two different people. So I would go into ceremony and I would fall apart, and I would be honest with my like deep close sisters that I was so unhappy.
Yeah.
And then I would go out into the world with my normal friends
Yeah.
and on the internet and with my husband and with my parents and be like, I'm great. I'm doing great. I'm like the best mom ever. And it was that split that was so exhausting.
Yeah.
And what I finally started to do step by step over time was, how can I be one person everywhere?
Yeah.
And when I finally committed to trying, it took many years to be fully integrated, to be one person everywhere. It's just less exhausting.
Oh my gosh, I love that. How can I be one person everywhere?
Yeah.
I think that's I have a history in corporate as well. So like definitely understand that kind of chameleon vibe. Yeah. Where it was like, and I used to take pride in it. I was like, oh, I can merge into any environment I'm in.
Totally.
And it's only when you're on the other side, you're like, that is not a good thing. Like it's not good to constantly kind of be flip-flopping around. There were two things that you said there that I really want to dive a little bit deeper into. The first thing is, and it's actually based on an Instagram post I saw the other day. So I'm doing a scrolly scroll, not a scrolly scroll. And it came up on my like Discover Reels. And it was this reel. I don't follow her, so I don't know who it was, but she shared this reel and she said, I recently unfollowed 3 women I used to look up to on my Instagram, and here's why in the caption. And in the caption, she basically said, like, I used to really admire these women, and they've recently shared how actually behind the scenes they were burnt out, they were like struggling, they sold me a lie, and I don't want to follow these women anymore.
Yeah.
And the comments were interesting. It was like a mix. Some people were like, yeah, this is terrible. Good you unfollowed them.
And the other side was like, hey, like, we don't have to share everything that we're going through in real time on the internet.
Yeah.
And it just really sparked it in me when you mentioned your own experience there of being this life coach. You know, you're showing up to life coaching business, and then you're falling apart in ceremony. I just want to hear your take on this.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on it?
That's a really great question. I think everyone is called to do it differently. And I think everyone is called to do it differently at different times. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be in a deep relationship with your soul, because your soul is the only part of you that can really tell you when it's appropriate to fall apart on the internet or fall apart in private.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing that is important for me is that, like, let's say I'm in a moment in my life when I'm feeling really emotionally tender. What I won't do is lie and say I'm feeling emotionally great.
Yeah.
And what I will often do inside of my spiritual community, inside of Holy Woman, I'll be honest there, and I will use it as a way to show how I'm using ceremony and using sacred feminine principles to be with myself. But I also think that it is important for people to understand that we're all going to go through waves. And I think it's actually really great to share about it afterwards. And we also, like, the thing that would happen for me for a long period of time, and I think this is common for a lot of people, were that I was looking for my community to, like, give me a boost. And, you know, when I was younger, you know, it was probably when I was like in my mid-20s doing a lot of this like internet stuff, I would share these sort of like sob stories as they were happening, and I would get all this love back. But that was just filling a hole in me that I needed to fill myself.
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of layered and complex. We can't be looking to the internet to fill those holes of love. I think if we can hold ourselves and we can use it as a teaching opportunity, it's great. And I feel like it's really important to hold those things close to you if they're tender, and to not get everybody's opinion on the matter. And maybe don't pretend you're fine, but like go teach something,
Yeah.
you know, that you feel good teaching about.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
Does that
on
make
this.
sense?
Totally, because it got me thinking about, I had a hard pregnancy, and it got me thinking about my own experience and that I didn't share how hard it was at the time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have capacity to share on the internet how I was feeling. I was just in it. And the thing that worried me the most in that time was like, can I hold space for clients still? And the thing that I discovered was, yes, I could hold amazing space for other people. There's duality, and I think it just really speaks to that, what you've been speaking about there as a woman as well, the range, rather than it's like I'm this or I'm that, I'm this or I'm that. It's like I'm a bit of this and I'm a bit of that.
Yeah.
And you spoke about the roles that we're meant to be in, and that we won't necessarily have external examples of those. What roles are we meant to be in? Tell me. I need to know.
Oh, well, I mean, I just think that people are inventing roles at a rapid rate these days.
Okay.
I really believe that the people alive right now are here to do things that have never been done before. And we're just seeding these new frequencies, these new ideas, these new things that have never been done.
Yeah.
And I just think the weirder and the wilder it is, the better.
Yeah.
And so my only advice to people is like, nobody knows. And probably no one has done it before. So the only thing people can do is like find a way to drop into their soul and find a way to go in so deep that they can begin to see what they came here to do, and to create enough space that they can hear themselves. Because if we're only copying what's already been done, we're not going to move forward as a society.
Yeah. And is this the age of Aquarius kind of
The
energy
age of
as
Aquarius.
well?
This is it. This is the emergent, eccentric invention of new and exciting things.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm excited for this. I want to come back to this thread of motherhood and this experience. So you're going through postpartum, partner's working 90 hours a week, you're not enjoying it like you thought you would. How did you move through that? Because I feel like I'm in that experience of the messy middle with you.
Yeah.
But like, how did you come out to the other side?
Oh, it was really hard. Well, on top of that, I then got pregnant again when Marshall was 9 months old.
Wow.
So I was mostly really in it and super miserable for like 3 years.
Yeah.
And the only thing that kept me going was being in ceremony. And it's why I do what I do now, because if I didn't have that, if I didn't have a place to see my future, to excavate who I was and make sense of why I was so miserable, and also to see the mythic overlay of the challenges of my life, and to really continue to ask myself, how is this here for me? How am I being trained? How am I being initiated? What am I learning how to do right now so that I am gathering tools to be the woman that I came here to be? So I really started to, because I was in ceremony all the time, I saw it as my soul's path and the mystery school of my life. And so I just showed up for it every day. Like, what is this teaching me? What do I have to learn? And how can I move through this with consciousness? And so it's hard because it would have just been easier to numb out or leave or just like, leave my body, whatever it's going to be. And I definitely did that in a lot of ways and just had to keep coming back. But some things that helped besides that were just getting as much support as I could. Like, I just tried to build a bigger boat.
Yeah.
And then
Be specific. What did that actually look like
well,
for you?
it looked like having more childcare than I thought was okay for me to have.
This is why I wanted to be specific, because I feel like this is
so I was like, I could survive on a nanny only being here like 3 half-ish days a week.
Yeah.
But I was just drowning. So then it's like, okay, I'm going to have a full-time nanny.
Yeah.
And then I got a full-time assistant
Yeah.
to help me with the house and all the logistics.
Yeah.
Because whatever free time I had, I needed to be going to therapy.
Yeah.
I needed to be tending to my sacred practice. I needed to be moving my body because I was sick. Like, I was 40 to 50 pounds heavier than I am right now.
Yeah.
My body was shutting down. I was really depressed. I had a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. It was dark. And at the same time, I also had to make enough money to support my like very growing family, like while I was pregnant with a second child and had an infant. And so it was just a lot. It was a lot of pressure. And so the support was really important for me. That, of course, added more financial pressure, which was not ideal, but I had to pick my battles.
Yeah.
There was probably a path that maybe would have been easier, but it's just the one that I chose. And it felt easier to just like try to make more money than it did to like not have childcare.
Yeah.
And that was really the main thing. I had to have a beautiful space. I'm an outer sensor in human design. So my home always had fresh flowers and it was always really beautiful. And I had the most amazing group of friends.
Yeah.
Like, I had a mom's group. I actually saw one of them here yesterday and they just literally saved my life. They were over because Jonathan was not even home on the weekends. So they would come over for pancakes on Saturday. They would be there for bath time with me because if I didn't have them, I would literally just be alone with my baby.
I'm literally starting to cry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think just like 2 things. Like, firstly, like, thank you for your honesty, because I think authenticity and honesty get banded around a lot, but like, actually hearing someone's genuine experience and like just saying I was miserable for 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're so addicted to like the happy endings, we miss that there was the really rough bits in between.
Absolutely.
And how real that can be.
Yeah.
And also just like how amazing mum friends are, and
just thank God for these women.
And also support. Like, I think support is so necessary in those moments and when you need it. and also just being honest that you had support as well. I think that's something that we really get to work to take shame away from as women as well.
Well, here's the thing. For 2.5 million years, if a
Yeah.
woman was alone with her baby, it meant that she was in war, like fleeing. Like
Wow.
moms weren't alone with their kids.
No.
That's like not a thing that we have evolved to be able to do.
Yeah.
So it's very normal when we're alone with our kids that our fight or flight is kicked up.
Yeah.
So from an epigenetic, perspective, that means that we're in danger and we're going to feel like we're dying.
Yeah.
And so, and it's
God,
like
I
if
feel
men are
that.
alone with their kids, they're just going hunting.
Yeah.
So it's like, Jonathan, he can be alone with my kids. I have 3 of them now for like 10 days. And it's like, he's fine. After like 2 days, I feel like I'm dying. But if I have another mom there,
Yeah.
everything's great.
This
It's not about the work. It's about being alone.
this has blown my mind. This is so true of an experience.
Yeah.
Like I will feel, and I'm so glad you can explain it this way as well, because the problem that I have explaining this is that I love Leo more than anything. Like, and he's actually a really easy baby. Like he's super happy. He's chill.
He's so cute.
He's like cute.
I just love him.
But he's amazing, and I love being with him. Of course, he's my son.
Yeah.
And I feel so drained when I am solo parenting, so drained so quickly, and I will feel so frazzled. It's that frazzled feeling. It's that like I need to go lie in a bath for a while afterwards and just like come back into my body.
Yeah.
And you've just explained exactly why.
Well, because when we're in fight or flight, oftentimes the part of our brain that is turned on is hypervigilance.
Yeah.
So we're always looking for danger. Our nervous systems can't settle.
Yeah.
But when we're with other women and their kids, or we're with our partners, it's just, we can have the same challenges and feel relaxed in them.
Yeah.
And it makes parenting so much easier. But here's one thing that's coming up that I want to make sure that I say is that what I should have done during that time is had Jonathan pause on his residency and go make some money. I think that, I'll speak for me, it was too much for me
Yeah.
to be the primary breadwinner and have 2 babies in 2 years.
It's a lot.
And the issue was I took that on myself because I feel so capable. And a lot of us, especially in our generation, we've been raised that we can do anything. But the truth is that it wasn't fair for me to play both of those roles at the same time while Jonathan was investing in his own career.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have your partner completely change their life in order for you to be healthy and sane. And I just think that we've gotten into this pattern of women where now that we have so many opportunities in our careers and to make money, that in a lot of relationships, what I see, and I definitely did this myself, is that we're just letting our male partners do whatever they want. And we're just filling in all the gaps for them.
Yeah.
And it's just really not fair, and it's not okay.
Yeah.
So I wish that I had made larger, wide sweeping changes because, a lot of times people will say like, oh, you can like boost yourself up or do a little bit of this or just like meditate more or like make sure you get to the gym. But like sometimes someone needs to quit their job.
Yeah.
Or you need to move cities or you need to completely change your life. And those things are really hard to do.
Yeah.
But often it's necessary.
I love that we're having this conversation. So there's 2 things I want to ask you about this. The first one being, I think, as is always the way, in hindsight, we can see the path. How do you think you could have, I'm thinking if someone's listening to this and maybe they're in that situation, how can we support another woman? Like how could you have realized that? How could you have maybe anchored more in that decision of like, actually, I don't get to take more on right now. We get to split the load a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the piece that is really important, and this was a really big tool that I had to learn, is part of our internalized patriarchy as women is to be afraid of men. So we've been trained to be afraid. And I was afraid to make Jonathan upset. I was afraid to hurt his feelings. I was afraid to tell him that he wasn't being a good enough partner for me. And what happens is our nervous systems, we have trauma from generations of being hit, being put out of the house. And it's important to realize that up until very recently, if we were in conflict with our male partners, then we didn't have any rights. So we didn't have an option but to keep the peace and to smooth things over and to just keep the man happy.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't keep him happy, then we would have been destitute because we couldn't open our own credit card. We couldn't own land.
Yeah.
And so that was life-threatening for many women. So it's really important. It was important for me, and I think it's important to everybody listening to understand the difference between feeling like we're going to die and just being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because when I think the reason why in that moment during that time in my life, I didn't bring it up is because I felt like I was going to die if I had that conversation with him.
Yeah.
To ask him to change the course of his life for me made me feel like I was going to die. But now I know it actually just makes me feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
And I think when women understand how our bodies still remember being in life or death situations because of our male partner, it brings validation and compassion to ourselves for how we're feeling. But then we can realize, oh, but I actually do have rights now.
Yeah.
And this is not life or death. And I am capable of having an uncomfortable conversation.
I think the thing that I almost jumped in there, but I was getting excited. Yeah. I think the thing that I was hearing as well, and that was you saying, well, I was scared to ask him to change his life. And actually, we change our lives when we have children.
All the time.
And no one asks us.
Yeah.
No one asks us. It has to.
Right.
Your life has to. You have no choice. No matter how supported you are, like a whole flag that I'm waving, I don't know, something that I'm doing is that no matter how much support you have, you're still a full-time mom.
Oh yeah.
Like, so regardless of how much support, whatever you have going on in your life, you change. But I think maybe it's a new thing that maybe men are realizing, oh, maybe I get to change as well.
Yeah.
And it's a get to rather than like it necessarily being a have to, but like there is an element here of we're both parents. This is naturally going to impact me more, and depending on other factors, more and more. But like, that has to be part of their journey too.
I totally agree. And this is a really big thing that Jonathan and I went through, where what I realized was there was so much joy and awakening and growth that came out of the responsibility of being a parent. And we had created this dynamic mostly because of my internalized patriarchy, where Jonathan didn't have a lot of actual responsibility.
Yeah.
And because of that, he wasn't connecting with our kids. And he wasn't growing as a human.
Yeah.
And so then I realized that actually giving him responsibility is a gift. And that shifted everything for us. Yeah.
And what did the shift look like?
Well, it sort of happened over time, but really, when he graduated from residency and we moved from California to Massachusetts, we got really clear on creating new agreements in our marriage. And I had done a lot of work, and I had been having visions on a regular basis. And I was pretty clear about the life that I wanted to create. And that required both of us showing up differently. And so now we're really 50-50 on the parenting front, 50-50 on the financial front. And that's just what works for us. I don't think there's no one way to do it. It's just that Jonathan and I spend so much time going into ourselves and asking first ourselves, what do I want? And a big question we ask ourselves a lot is, what would our life be like if we didn't have kids or we weren't with each other? And that really loosens up the visioning process a fair amount, because I think that our internalized patriarchy can also block our fantasies and our creativity. So when we remove the things that we imagine make it impossible for us to be ourselves, and then we can actually see who we are, then we try to get really creative with each other around how can we still be those people, you know, with 3 kids and being married. And this has really helped us create a super unconventional lifestyle in a very conventional life in a lot of ways. I mean, you know, I live a half an hour outside of Boston. My 3 kids go to public school.
Yeah.
And, you know, if someone were to like come over and just like watch us for a second, we'd look pretty normal. But then if you look a little bit more closely, or you understand our dynamic, or you see what we're doing on a daily basis, like really different.
I love this. I like that. Those questions have blown me away. I just think they're so powerful.
It's really important. And we ask each other all the time because Jonathan and I are really committed to the path of full self-expression. And I believe that if we have this idea that having kids means that we can't be fully expressed, we're just going to resent our children.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that just can't be true. That can't be like who, I mean, I know who, because this is what I study, but like they just made up that rule that you have to choose between yourself or having a family.
Yeah.
And it's just, you have to be more creative, and you're definitely going against the current of our society, but it's really doable.
Oh my God, this conversation is so healing for me in itself.
Oh,
I'm
I'm
like
so
fucking
glad.
loving this. I want to ask about you and Jonathan, because I've already said you guys are fucking amazing together. I'm obsessed with you both. And you've said, you know, we keep falling deeper and deeper in love with each other. And I feel like this is actually, again, something that goes against the traditional narrative. I feel like we're taught to think that relationships get stale or boring or blah, blah, blah. So I guess there's a 2-part question here. One is around how you have navigated that falling deeper in love with each other. But secondly, and I ask this because I get asked this a lot myself, I'm really interested in your take on it, is how have you been with a man who is, like you said, he's a doctor, you know, he's very much within that kind of, I don't know how I'd call it, more masculine system, I guess.
Yeah.
How have you navigated him going on this spiritual journey?
Yeah.
Have you pushed him into it? Have you gently
hard.
caressed him into
No,
it?
hard shove.
I want to know.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But
Okay.
yeah, so Jonathan and I have been together for 18 years. We met in college, and I was throwing 4 parties a week, and he was a football player. So we're really different than we were when we met. And for a very long time, we were stuck in that dynamic. And what was happening was we were really both growing in our outer lives. You know, I was growing spiritually. I was reading a lot of personal development books. I was cultivating a lot of mastery around inner child work and, you know, my emotions and who I was and all that. And he was growing in his career and learning about how to be a doctor and, you know, being out in the world and, you know, all that stuff. But when we came home, we were like 21 again. And we fought like we did in college. We treated each other like we did in college. And then, of course, when we had kids, we would sink into the patterns of our parents. So then Jonathan just like became his dad. And like, it was, that's like a whole other thing, and we just weren't our best selves with each other. And I was really tired of running into other residents and nurses who were just like, your husband is so amazing. He's just like the best. And I'm just like, really? Because he's a dick to me, you know? And so, and Jonathan and I talk about this all the time. This is like not news to the internet. And there was this belief system that we got to be our worst selves for each other. And I was just like, who said that?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just not available. I wasn't available to be his punching bag, and I wasn't available to be his mom. So I decided that Jonathan could not be the source of my stress. that there were plenty of other things that were stressful in my life, and it could not be my partner anymore. And I really wanted to be with someone who got me, who celebrated me, who supported me, and who was a safe space for me to land. And what we really dug into is, instead of this belief that people stay the same, what if we leaned into the belief that people are always changing and growing? And what if growth was the rule? And what if it's not just women who grow? And what if it's not just women who can be on a spiritual journey? And so it was really hard because he fought against it for a super long time. He was really tired in his career and didn't feel like he had the bandwidth to do anything else. And it was a lot of like, why can't I be enough for you? And all this stuff. And I was doing a lot of subtle placating, like, hey, we're like doing the dishes. Why don't you like read that book? Just like, oh, just shove this over here, like under your door. It's like not helpful. Or I was thinking that I could coach him along or help him figure this out. And, be like, well, it sounds like you're like projecting a little bit. And he's just like, what are you talking? It was not great. And so finally, what I realized I had to do, this was like after years of really struggling with this. I had to get clear for myself who, my life is long and who is the partner that I want to be with. And I had to decide, was it more important for me to be with the man who I had children with? Yeah. Or was it more important for me to be with a man who could meet me? And I just decided that the latter was more important. And so I really came to Jonathan with the job description of like, this is the role. This is the job. I don't necessarily recommend this for everybody, but this was after like 5 years of like really trying to get him to do the work. We'd been in therapy. Like I actually was ready to leave. Yeah. And fully just like chose that for myself. I don't believe it's good to use it as a tool if you're like not really at that point.
Yeah, I think the energy of manipulation is different to the energy
totally.
of like
I'm like really
out.
it was the energy of honesty. Yeah. Like I was just really being honest about where I was and how miserable I was. And so I gave him the job description and I was just like, is this your path too? Is this what you want? If you don't want it, go be with someone who you can be mediocre with. But like, it's just not me.
I feel like
if you just need to go be mediocre, go be free to be medium. But like, it's just not where I'm at, Yeah. I'm like here for epic love and excellence and like depth and growth. And that's what I want. And I'm like, it would be great if it were you. Yeah. I would prefer it to be you. But like, you've got to want this. And he's like, I really want to be that person, not just for you, but for me. So like he chose it. And then there was some momentum and he started finding a spiritual practice that worked for him and like getting into the stuff because it had to be for him. And now he teaches this, which is so great. And we still have our bumps because we're always going to be different. And now it's like, I'm growing one way and he's growing a different way. And we're just along for the ride with each other, but it's always new. And it's, we're awakening through each other. It's like the hardest work I've ever done is in my marriage for sure.
I love this. I always think there's beauty in the contrast. There's so much beauty, and I think we have to be careful of being in an echo chamber. And I think our relationship can be one of the places that we can create that of like just bouncing the same thing back and forth. And I think there's real beauty from the outside looking in, and the two of you having differing perspectives, being in different kind of worlds, and having in a world that you're in together, and having the beauty that comes through the contrast of that.
Yeah, and it's so fun because we can now come to each other and be like, hey, I'm different now. Like I just went through this whole thing, or I went on this retreat, or I just had this amazing thing happen in ceremony. This is a new part of me. And then we get to navigate that to each other. And sometimes it's really rattling. Like, oh crap, I have this new thing. Like, how does this fit in to our life? And do we need to like rearrange something or like, but we're just so committed to being together that we can be flexible in what our life looks like in order to create more and more space for us to be who we are.
Oh my God. I was already obsessed. I'm even more obsessed at this point. Okay, so you've spoken about ceremony a lot during this conversation, and I'm actually going to ceremony with you tomorrow.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited.
It's gonna be so great.
I feel like this is like the amuse-bouche or something. I'm like, I'm like warming up. But we're going in, and there's a couple of us ladies going in. Talk to me more about, because I feel like ceremony is quite a broad term, and that so much can be ceremony and so much can be made into ceremony. What's your unique perspective and approach to moving through ceremony?
Such a great question. So there are many, many, many different lineages of ceremony. And I'm in a lineage called the 13 Moon Mystery School. My mentor is Elaine Kalila Doughty. And the lineage is founded by Ariel Spilsbury. And it's a remembered lineage in that she had visions of the technology. But if you go back into the history books around what priestesses were doing in Avalon, there's a lot of it's rooted in what we believe actually happened. Wow. And so what's so important to understand is that because of the erasure, all we really have is remembrance right now. So the way that the type of ceremony that I lead works is I am sort of like how people, if a Reiki practitioner is aligning the chakras of a body in order to give someone the experience of being in alignment or rested, what I do is I am aligning and creating a certain energetic grid or frequency in a room so that when you walk into that room, you can feel the difference between your personality, the person you think you should be, versus your soul and your truth. So when you can create a vibration around truth, you can then hear and feel truth in your body. And so it's really powerful. And what I love about it is that it's very efficient and you don't need to do plant medicine. So it means we can do it all the time. And it's the perfect way for people who are feeling lost or are feeling dead inside or feel like they have done such a good job following the path they are supposed to follow. And they're in this place of, who am I? Why am I here? What's next? I really believe that this is the best way to answer those questions. And when I sat in ceremony for the first time, I just had this experience of being home. You know, I remembered I've never felt so held. I'd never felt so seen. And I also have never had so much fun. Like, I love being in ceremony. For me, it is my happy place. And the way we do it in my lineage, it's also beautiful. Like, we all wear the same color. The altars are really beautiful. There's all these candles and incense because women, we're about the senses. And I was, when I started seeking some spirituality outside of going to church, I would find myself in like sort of plain yoga rooms with people in spandex, which is like great. But when I got into ceremony and we are in like red velvet dresses and it's like there's all these candles lit and there's incense and there's just like, it's just beautiful. I'm like, yes, this is for me.
Yeah. I love it. It feels like a multi-sensory, fully embodied experience just going into that.
Exactly.
I promise we're going to wrap this up soon because
I have
so much that
you don't have to rush me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we've got part 2 coming as well.
Okay, great.
But I just want to, you mentioned church then.
Yeah.
And I do just want to touch on this.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I want to start with the question. So you have a background of going to church.
Yep.
What's Jonathan's?
He's Jewish.
He's Jewish.
Yep.
So you got Christian Jewish. how do you weave that together with the priestess energy and ceremony? And
so what we've done is, so let me first say, I loved going to church growing up. And I think it's a really big reason why I do what I do, because I felt really safe in my church. I felt really seen in my church. And it was a place that really deeply supported me. And I came alive there in a lot of ways. When I tried to find a church as an adult, I was really annoyed that we were just talking about a male God and Jesus all the time. And I started to understand the impact, again, of not hearing stories about women, of there being very limited archetypal representation. And I just got a little bit bored by not hearing about things that directly impacted me. So the way that Jonathan and I have done it is we have looked for the sacred feminine in Christianity and in Judaism. And there is a lot of it, which is so exciting. So now all of our holidays that we celebrate with our children, we make sure to balance between the stories of the sacred masculine and the stories of the sacred feminine. So at Christmas, we're talking just as much about Mother Mary and her experience of being a birther than we are about the baby Jesus. On Easter, we're talking just as much about Mary Magdalene's experience of watching her beloved, be resurrected, and her abilities as a priestess to create the situation for him to be able to be resurrected through her anointing, than we are about his process of dying and coming back to life. So, and when we talk about Passover, we're talking about how probably, Moses went to Mount Sinai, and sin actually means new moon. And so, and the sinners were actually womb priestesses.
wow.
And so when we talk about Passover, we talk about how the 40 years he spent in the desert was most likely worshiping the goddess. And they found a temple in the shape of a crescent moon, right where they believe that Moses was after he crossed the Red Sea. So I just think it's important to look for those things. I don't believe that any of us need to leave the religion we grew up with.
Yeah.
But I think that there's so much power in evolving it.
Oh my gosh. I read Mary Magdalene Revealed.
Such a great book. Megan is amazing.
Oh my God, incredible. When was it? Maybe a year and a half ago? And my mind was blown.
Yeah.
I had no idea that women had been written out so much of religion. And I think your approach to this really speaks to your approach in general, which is what I love, which it just feels so integrated. It feels like
Thank you.
allowing all these different parts and bringing them together. Okay, you mentioned anointing
Yes.
them. Now, I believe that you did some anointing. We did a bridal blessing for Mel before her wedding, and you did some anointing then. I witnessed it and was like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
But tell us more what anointing actually is. Because again, I feel like this isn't actually something I've really heard about, really.
Yeah. So anointing is an incredible priestess skill. And I learned the art of anointing from Diana Dubrow, who's the founder of the Emerald Temple. And it is the lineage of the temples of Dendara from ancient Egypt and the temples of Isis. So priestesses, when they went to go live in the temples and get trained. So there's basically all of these priestess universities, and you would go and you would learn all of these skills. So it could be divination, it could be anointing, it could be herbalism. And this was our stand-in for medicine.
Can we bring back Priestess University? You sound amazing.
So my mentor Kalila has a Priestess University.
Wow.
Yes, and that's where I was trained and ordained, and it's called Priestess Presence. She's amazing. Everyone look it up. And anointing is so powerful because plants are so powerful. And when Diana remembered and then went back and studied, found the historical evidence for what she saw in her visions, created these incredible blends that bring light into the body where there is darkness. And so what's so cool is that the oils themselves are initiating you into being your fullest expression. So what I love is that when I'm in ceremony, the frequencies are initiating people to be in their fullest expression. But you can also do an anointing and the oils initiate you into your fullest expression. I love using both. And when I started using the oils, it was like fast track to discovering who I was. But you can't use any oils. You know, Diana's oils are potent medicine, and she sources them from different parts of the world that have been tending to the, just like having such sacred reverence for these oils and for these plants that it really does make a difference. And what I love about them is it's like it brings God into the body. And it's a tool of remembering how sacred we are. And so the word Christ means anointed one. And Mary Magdalene was an anointing priestess. And we know from the history books that she was the first person to anoint Jesus. So the only reason why Jesus is called Jesus Christ was because he was anointed by Mary Magdalene.
Wow.
And part of the resurrection story is you can anoint in a way that allows your soul to be more informed, more seen, more available for people to interact with. So it was her process of anointing after he was crucified that many people believe is what allowed him to resurrect and then walk, you know, among us, as the Bible says.
This is incredible.
Yeah, it's like a really amazing tool. Yeah, I have oils all over me right now.
This is why you're glowing so much.
thanks.
She walked in, it was just this like energy. I was like,
Thank
I get it now.
Thank you.
So I just want to close with a little something that's implementable for people
Yeah.
who are listening. What's a way that people can bring in ceremony or the sacred feminine into their lives, into their day-to-day lives,
Yeah.
so they can really feel the medicine from this?
That's so great. So I always say, like, my structure of bringing the sacred feminine into your life is what can you do daily, what can you do monthly, and what can you do once a year. So for me, what I do daily is my sacred start. And I have a really great guide with this. If you just go to my Instagram and DM me the word morning, I have a whole free sacred start guide.
You know that I'm going to be DMing you straight after
Great,
this.
do it. And I walk women through how to have a sacred feminine morning practice, which is like really different than like setting goals or meditating or like doing whatever. And that is a great way to be in ceremony with yourself every day, to connect with the goddess, to connect with your soul. And then I believe once a month, either on the new moon or the full moon, it is wonderful to be in ceremony with a group of women. So this is what we do inside of my spiritual community. You don't have to do it with me. But if someone wants to be guided and held in ceremony, we do this every new moon. And what we encourage women to do is to gather their friends in their living room to watch the ceremony on their TV. And we live stream it with a professional video crew. It's super fun.
Yeah.
And then once a year, go be with people in person for like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Because that just, my friend Kate Northrup always says, it's like, you know, when you dip fabric in dye for 2 hours, it's like a nice shade of blue. But if you leave it in there for 3 solid days, it's completely saturated. I think that's what going on a pilgrimage or a 3-day retreat does. And so we have one once a year called Emerge that we do during the fall equinox. And we're in ceremony all day. And it's so nourishing and beautiful. And it just really changes who you are. But people need to find like their leader, their community, their lineage that really makes their soul sing. You know, I just offer one way. And my hope is that when people come through my community, they will think about how they will want to do it differently and what they want to create, so that we have more and more and more ways for women to be in these sacred spaces with each other.
Oh my gosh, all of those sound amazing. And I love that framework as well of the one.
I just think it's important to think about.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
This conversation has been such a pleasure. I can't even find words
Thank you
for it.
so much for having
Incredible.
me. I just love being here with you. It's the best.
Thank you so much.
I hope you loved today's episode as much as we did recording it. Don't forget to share a little screenshot on Instagram and tag us in, letting us know what your biggest breakthroughs were. And Sarah's actually going to be back on Friday for the wind down, and she's going to be reading out, we're going to be reading out together the worst comments that she has received on Instagram. We're going to be asking about being called a satanic cult leader. Like, we are going there. So don't miss Friday's episode. To make sure you never miss an episode, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast so you automatically get those episodes downloaded to whatever platform you listen on. And I will see you Friday.